Hello student, welcome back to my channel. My name is Satwika and today we're going to be learning about the nervous system. In the previous classes, we've learned the tiniest component of our nervous system, the neuron, and how the neuron communicate to each other. Now we move forward to learn about the system. This chapter does not provide a detailed roadmap of the nervous system or the very detail of them. If you're a medical student, you might do so, but as a psychology student, this chapter is more like a world globe describing the large and basic structure of our nervous system. In this first module, introduce the key neuroanatomical terms and the outlines of overall structures of our nervous system. And in the second module, in the next video, we will concentrate on the cerebral cortex, the largest part of the mammalian central nervous system. And be prepared, this chapter contains a huge number of new terms. You should not expect to memorize all of them at once, but you should review this chapter repeatedly. All right, your nervous system includes a huge number of neurons and even a huger number of synapses. But how do all the parts work together to make one behaving unit? Does each neuron have a unique function? Or does the brain operate as an undifferentiated whole? The answer is something between those extremes. Consider an analogy to human society. Each individual has a specialty, such as teacher, farmer, nurse, but no one performs any function without the cooperation of many other people. Similarly, brain areas and neurons have specialized function, but they perform these roles by means of connection with other areas. For vertebrates, we distinguish the central nervous system from the peripheral nervous system. As you can see from this figure, the red color is the central nervous system, consists of the brain and the spinal cord, and the blue color here is the peripheral nervous system, or the PNS, connects the brain and the spinal cord to the rest of the body. Part of the PNS is the somatic nervous system, which consists of the axon conveying messages from the sense organ to the CNS and from the CNS to the muscles. And another part of the PNS is the autonomic nervous system, which controls the heart, the intestines, and other organs. And the autonomic nervous system has some of its cell bodies within the brain or the spinal cord and some in cluster along the sides of the spinal cord. All right, before we're moving further, to follow a map, right, you must understand north, south, east, and west, right? Because the nervous system is three-dimensional, we need more terms to describe it. And this figure indicates dorsal means toward the back, and ventral means toward the stomach. Then anterior is toward the end, and posterior is toward the rear end. While superior is above another part, while inferior is below another part. And continuing the map terminology, proximal here means located close, approximate to the point of origin or attachment, and distal, located more distant from the point of origin or attachment, while lateral is toward the side away from the midline, and medial toward the midline, away from the side, and ipsilateral on the same side of the body, while contralateral is on the opposite side of the body, one on the left and one on the right. This figure also illustrates the three ways of looking a plane through the brain. So this is like the whole brain, and the way we look at the brain known as horizontal, sagittal, and coronal. The coronal plane or frontal shows brain structure as seen from the front, and sagittal plane shows brain structure as seen from the side, while transfer or horizontal plane shows brain structure as seen from the above. All right, and further, to give you a global view of our nervous system, here's the diagram to make you easier to remember. So nervous system divided into two, the central nervous system or the CNS and the peripheral nervous system or the PNS, right? And CNS consists of spinal cord and the brain, and PNS consists of somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system is also divided into two, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So let's take a look at them closer. First, we will learn about the spinal cord. Okay, so the spinal cord is the part of the CNS, or part of the central nervous system, within the spinal column. The spinal cord communicates with all the sense organ and muscles except those of the head. All right, and the spinal cord is segmented structure like this, and each segment has both on the left and right sides a sensory nerve and the motor nerve. One of the earliest discovery about the function of the nervous system was that the entering dorsal roots, or the axon bundles, carry sensory information, and the exciting ventral roots carry motor information. And the cells bodies of the sensory neurons are in cluster of neurons outside the spinal cord called the dorsal root ganglia. So ganglia is the plural of ganglion, a cluster of neurons. And in most cases, a neuron cluster outside the CNS is called a ganglion. And a cluster inside the CNS is called a nucleus. All right, so the cell bodies of the motor neuron are inside the spinal cord, right? And the cross section through the spinal cord shown in figures like and the H shape here is the gray matter in the center of the cord is densely packed with cell bodies and dendrites. And many neurons from the gray matters of the spinal cord send axons to the brain or to other part of the spinal cord through the white matter that is containing a myelinated axon. This is the white matter here, okay? And each segment of the spinal cord sends sensory information to the brain and receives motor commands from the brain. All that information passes through the tracks of axons in the spinal cord. If the spinal cord is cut at a given segment, the brain loses sensation from that segment and below. The brain also loses motor control over all parts of the body served by the segment on the lower ones. Okay. And next, we will overview the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system here consists of neurons that receive information from and send commands to the heart, the intestines, and other organs. But before we moving forward learning about the autonomic nervous system, it is important because the autonomic nervous system is very important for our behavior. You should remember that the autonomic nervous system is part of the peripheral nervous system, right? And the peripheral nervous system consists of somatic and autonomic nervous system. Here, the somatic nervous system is responsible for voluntary control or a conscious behavior, such as walking, moving our limbs, typing, and etc. While the autonomic nervous system here is responsible for involuntary control or function that we're not conscious in doing them, such as our heartbeat. They keep beating even we're not saying them to do so, right? And then also our digestive system and etc. Somatic nervous system here innervates skeletal muscle, consists of neurons that connected from CNS to muscle, containing of a single nerve and the skeletal muscle cells. While the autonomic nervous system consists of neurons that send information received from the heart, the digestive organ, and etc. More details on our autonomic nervous system, this involuntary control system divided into two types, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system is a network of nerves that prepare the organs for a burst of vigorous activity, consists of chains of ganglia just to the left and the right of the spinal cord central regions. These ganglia have connected back and forth with the spinal cord. So the sympathetic axon here prepare the organs for the fight and flight action, such as by increasing breathing, increasing our heart rate, and decreasing our digestive activity. Because the sympathetic ganglia are closely linked, they often act as a single system or in sympathy with one another. Although certain events activate some parts more than other, they still act as a single system. So sympathetic nervous system here mainly using norepinephrine or noradrenaline as the neurotransmitter in postganglionic synapses. And the next is the parasympathetic nervous system, sometimes called as the rest and digest system, because they facilitate vegetative and non-emergency responses. So the term para here means beside or related to. So parasympathetic activities are related to and generally the opposite of the sympathetic nerve activities. For example, the sympathetic nervous system increases heartbeat while the parasympathetic nervous system decreases it. Okay, it also increase the digestive activity. The parasympathetic system also promotes sexual arousal, including erection in males. Although the sympathetic and parasympathetic system produce contrary effect, both are constantly active to varying degree, right? And many stimuli arouse parts of both systems. So the parasympathetic nervous system axon here release the neurotransmitter called acetylcholine onto the organ. As you can see in this figure, the sympathetic nervous system is the red lines and the parasympathetic nervous system is the blue line here. Note that the adrenal gland, sweat gland, and hair erector muscles receive sympathetic input only. All right, we're going to moving forward and study about the brain as the main components of our central nervous system. So vertebrate brain has three major divisions here, the hindbrain, the midbrain, and the forebrain, as you can see in this figure and in this table. So the hindbrain main structure are the medulla, pons, and the cerebellum. The midbrain's main structure are tectum, tegmentum, superior collicus, inferior collicus, and substantia nigra, while the forebrain structure are the thalamus, hypothalamus, cerebral cortex, hippocampus, and basal ganglia. So let's take a look at them closer. First, the hindbrain, or the posterior part of the brain, consists of the medulla, the pons, and the cerebellum. So the medulla, pons, and the midbrain and certain central structure of the forebrain constitute the brain stem here. Okay, and the medulla or the medulla oblongata can be regarded as an enlarged extension of the spinal cord, just as the lower part of the body connects to the spinal cord. Right, back here. So the body connects the spinal cord via sensory and motor nerves, and the head and the organs connect the medulla and adjacent areas by 12 pairs of cranial nerves. Okay, so we will learn about cranial nerve later in the next slide. The pons here lies anterior and ventral to the medulla, and like the medulla, it contains nuclei for several cranial nerves. And the term pons here is the Latin for bridge, reflecting the fact that the pons axon from each half of the brain cross to the opposite side of the spinal cord, so that the left hemisphere controls the muscle of the right side of the body, and the right hemisphere of the brain controls the left side of the body. And lastly, the cerebellum here is the large hindbrain structure with many deep folds. Here is the cerebellum. Right? It's located in the lower part of the brain. It has been long known for its contribution to the control of movement, and many older textbooks describe that the cerebellum as important for balance and coordination. It is true, people with cerebellar damage are clumsy and lose their balance, but the function of the cerebellum extends far beyond balance and coordination. People with damage to the cerebellum have trouble shifting their attention back and forth between auditory and visual stimuli. They have difficulty also with timing, such as judging whether one rhythm is faster than another. And the cerebellum is also critical for certain types of learning and conditioning. Okay, so here is the 12 cranial nerves originating in the medulla, control the vital reflexes such as breathing, heart rate, vomiting, salivation, coughing, sneezing. And because, for example, because of opiate receptors which suppress activity are abundant in the medulla, opiate can produce a dangerous decrease in breathing and heart rate here. And here's the detailed cranial nerve number and their function. You can read them by yourself. And next, in the midbrain, is the midbrain. So as the name implies, early in development, the midbrain is the middle of the brain, although in adult mammals, it dwarfed and surrounded by the forebrain. So the midbrain here is more prominent in reptiles, amphibian, and fish. And the roof of the midbrain is called the tectum. Yeah. The swelling on each side of the tectum are the superior collicus and the inferior collicus. Both are important for sensory processing, and the inferior collicus for hearing and the superior collicus for vision. Under the tectum lies the tegmentum, yeah, the intermediate level of the brain. It's and another midbrain structure is the substantia nigra, which gives rise to a dopamine containing. All right, lastly, the forebrain is the most prominent part of the mammalian brain, consists of two cerebral hemispheres, right? One the left and one on the right, and each hemisphere is organized to receive sensory information mostly from the contralateral or the opposite side of the body. It controls muscles mostly on the contralateral sides by way of axons to the spinal cord and the cranial nerve nuclei. The outer portion of the cerebral cortex here under the cerebral cortex are other structure here, including the thalamus and the basal ganglia, and as well as several interlinked structures known as the limbic system form a border or limbus, or the Latin word for border, around the brain stem. All right. We will continue to learn more about the forebrain and the cerebral cortex in the next video. Thank you for your attention. I will see you shortly in the next video. See you.